You're listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.
Well, welcome everyone to this edition of the Mammal Watching podcast with me, John Hall from New York.
And me, Charles Foley from Minneapolis. How are you, John?
I am good, Charles. I'm good. I'm very excited about the guest we have coming up, Lisa Dabek. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. So I'm going to be very brief today. You'll be pleased to hear. The one thing I want to share is we occasionally get messages from people saying how much they enjoy the podcast, and thank you for those. Please keep them coming. But I got one that made me smile from Carl van Ginderduren. I think it's pronounced something like that. Who I met. I think we met him actually on our snow leopard trip. But he just had a really, really funny message, just saying he wants to say that he really appreciated the podcast. It's brought so much joy to his life. He's had some very busy, he didn't quite use those words, years with two young kids. And it's been difficult for him to travel, of course, as it often is when you've got small children around. So he's using the podcast as a way to live vicariously or enter the field vicariously through what we're talking about. And he's already looking forward to the kids getting a bit older so that he'll be able to take them out again into the forest, just as he did with his father when he was young. So it was nice to read that we're helping people, I like to think.
Yeah.
And what about you, Charles? I saw some pictures that Sierra, your daughter Sierra, posted on Instagram of you looking very, very fancy at some very swanky do. What was going on?
So I was actually wearing a new suit. It was the first time I had worn it, first suit I've ever owned in my life. And wow. I bought it 2 years ago in anticipation of wearing it regularly now that I was in the US. And it was the very first time I'd actually put the darn thing on. So the reason I was wearing it was because we were attending the Indianapolis Prize Gala, which Dr. Rob Shoemaker, who's the director of the Indianapolis Zoo, had very kindly invited us to. And the Indianapolis Prize, it's the world's premier conservation award. And every 2 years, they host a big gala where they bring in the 6 finalists of the prize, which this year was won by Amanda Vincent from Project Seahorse. And it was a wonderful event attended by lots of really interesting people from the conservation world. And we certainly had a great time. Now, the main Indianapolis Prize is given to real conservation heavyweights. So people like George Schaller, who we had on the program, Patricia Wright, Russell Mittermeier, etc. People who are already very well established and well-known conservationists. However, at this gala, they announced the creation of a new award, which will be given to emerging conservationists. So these would be young conservationists up to 40 years old who are at an early stage in their careers. And it's open to anyone who is making a significant impact on saving an animal species or group of species. And this is the sort of prize that can really launch someone's career. And I know that there are lots of young people working in countries all over the world who do excellent conservation work, but seldom receive any acknowledgement. And this is really an opportunity to bring their work to the attention of the wider conservation community. So if any of our listeners know of or meet any really inspiring young conservationists on their travels, I urge them to encourage them to apply. And the application process is relatively simple, and it can be submitted in 7 different languages. And that includes Spanish, Russian, Arabic, and Mandarin. So hopefully language won't be too much of a barrier for people applying. And important to note that the winner will attend the Indianapolis Prize event and will also receive a check for $50,000 towards their work, which, as we say in England, is better than a slap around the face with a wet fish. So we will add the link to the Emerging Conservationist Prize on the mammalwatching.com website so people can get the details from there. And we encourage everyone to take a look at it. And I should also say that when I was in Indianapolis, I met Joey Brunk, who has been following the podcasts assiduously and who reached out to John and I a little while ago. And Joey said that he absolutely loved the latest podcast with Martin Royal, who he thought was a great storyteller. So it was great to meet you, Joey, and I hope that you did eventually manage to extract your vehicle from the valet. So that's my news, John.
Well, it looked like a wonderful event, and that prize sounds fantastic. And I also extremely envious of you getting to, or at least Sierra, getting to feed an aardvark at the zoo that weekend, which looks absolutely like a lot of fun anyway.
Yeah, absolutely amazing animals. Well, today I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Lisa Dabek, a good friend who I've known for many years, since the days when we were both doing graduate work at the Smithsonian's Conservation and Research Center in Front Royal. And Lisa is senior conservation scientist at Seattle's Woodland Park Zoo and is the founder and director of the community-based tree kangaroo conservation program in Papua New Guinea. Since 1996, she and her team have worked in partnership with multiple different groups to study and protect the wildlife and rainforest habitat of Papua New Guinea, with a focus on the endangered Matschie's tree kangaroo. In 2009, her project and the local community created Papua New Guinea's first ever conservation area, protecting over 180,000 acres of rainforest habitat for the Matschie's tree kangaroo and other threatened species. Now, if there are any aspiring wildlife biologists in the audience, you really should go and read the Tree Kangaroo Program's website and annual reports, because it is a truly world-class program, and it is Exhibit A in how to achieve effective community conservation. Everything about this project, from the research to the partnerships, communication, donor engagement, etc., is excellent and is a fantastic example of how good conservation should be done. As a result, Lisa and her project have won numerous awards, and you really couldn't get a better role model for how to direct a successful conservation project. So, Lisa, welcome to the podcast. It's fabulous to have you here.
Thank you so much, Charles. And John.
Welcome from me as well. It really is a pleasure to talk to you.
Now, Lisa, I should mention that this has been a very big month for you. Firstly, you were presented with the highly prestigious Coolidge Medal at the IUCN conference in Marseille, which is awarded to conservation professionals who have made outstanding contributions to nature conservation. And secondly, you just got married this weekend, which is very exciting. And now, of course, you're appearing on the Mammal Watching podcast, which has to be the biggest highlight of them all. So it really doesn't get much better than this, does it?
It's the triple crown, for sure.
Well, welcome.
There is no better way to spend your honeymoon. Absolutely.
Really?
Well, thank you again for joining us. So the first question has to be, how did you decide you wanted to become a wildlife biologist?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in New York City in the Bronx, and so there wasn't a whole lot of wildlife there. But I spent a lot of time being taken to the Bronx Zoo. And I think that's common for city kids that end up being wildlife biologists, that zoos end up playing a really important role. We also used to spend part of our summers on Cape Cod, in Massachusetts. And so that was where I really got a love for nature, and particularly the ocean and the beaches and so on. And then we had cats when I was growing up. But then it turned out I was allergic to cats. So we had to give those up. So I had mice and gerbils. And so I got exposed to animals, but it was really, I think partly from my mom, her love of nature and the time that we spent either in New England or in Cape Cod. Yeah. And first, I actually wanted to be a marine biologist. And so when I went to the University of California at Santa Cruz, I got introduced to marine mammals, humpback whales on the East Coast and northern elephant seals in California. And that really made it clear for me that I wanted to be involved with wildlife, marine wildlife. And then I also studied environmental studies and was introduced to a natural history field program at the university, which I think there are very few natural history field programs. And that really instilled in me that I wanted to do applied wildlife biology to also help the animals as well. Yeah.
And Lisa, I can't believe I've never actually asked you this question, but I was thinking about this the other day. How did you actually land upon tree kangaroos in Papua New Guinea? Because I still have images of you taking out a Venn diagram and saying, okay, look at the map, which is the logistically most difficult country in the world to work in? And then looking at, so through a mammal book and saying, which is the logistically most difficult mammal to study? And where they intersect, you say, okay, that's tree kangaroos in Papua New Guinea. How did you make that decision?
I think I was really naive, to be honest. No. Actually, when I was in graduate school at the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington, I was introduced because I had done an internship at the National Zoo in the research department. I knew that zoos were a great place for studying animals. And I got introduced to tree kangaroos by the lead zookeeper, Judy Steenberg. And at the time, this was in the mid 1980s, and very little was known about tree kangaroos at all. And so they had 2 females with young or joeys in the pouch at Woodland Park Zoo. And I was interested in mother-young behavior and behavioral development of the young. And so it was this perfect opportunity. But I had never heard of tree kangaroos before. And I knew very little about Papua New Guinea as well. So that was my introduction. And I started studying them, and I absolutely fell in love with them. I think one of the reasons was I started reading the literature about marsupials and macropods or kangaroos, and everything said that they are primitive, quote, primitive mammals, and compared to eutherian mammals. And I just didn't understand that. And the more I studied marsupials, the more I realized they have an incredible strategy for reproduction and rearing their young. So that got me hooked initially. And then I found out that they were endangered in the wild. And that also hooked me as well. Yeah.
They are a fascinating group, the marsupials generally. And I wonder if there's some sort of, they call it in Australia the cultural cringe, which was the attitude of Australia towards Europe and the US, and the feeling that they were somehow inferior. That at least that was in the 90s, they called it that. I hope that's gone now. But I wonder if some of that permeated into the science as well, thinking somehow their mammals were less advanced, which, as you say, just isn't true. So could you tell us a bit more about tree kangaroos generally and their social structure and life?
Yeah, it's interesting that you ask about their social structure, because they're basically solitary animals. And actually originally in zoos, when it was not known what their social structure was, they used to keep them in groups, like you would with other kangaroos. And they kept losing the offspring. And finally, they started separating the females, especially when they had young. And then they realized that they were actually fairly solitary animals. So we learned a lot about the tree kangaroo biology and behavior from zoo animals. And in fact, Charles, that's where we met each other, because I was doing the reproductive biology of tree kangaroos, of females. And that brought me to Sam Wasser's lab at the Conservation Research Center at Smithsonian. And here I was studying tree kangaroos, this small little animal with small dung. I was extracting hormones from dung. And in walks Charles Foley, who's going to study elephants and extract hormones from dung from elephants. So it was a lot of fun, Charles.
It was indeed. Yes, it seems like an awfully long time ago at the moment.
Absolutely. But they're really amazing animals. They actually evolved twice from the trees. So all macropods came from an arboreal ancestor, like a possum-like ancestor, evolved to terrestrial kangaroos, and then tree kangaroos evolved back into the trees. They think some species related to like the rock wallabies that evolved back in. And so they're adapted to life in the trees. They've got long claws for climbing and rough pads on their feet for climbing, but they're not that graceful in the trees. And you've seen them, John, in Australia. Yeah. They have long tails, but they're not prehensile. They're just used for balance. Yeah. And also the fur, at least in the Matschie's tree kangaroo that I study, is a very thick fur, which is surprising for a tropical mammal, but they live high up in the cloud forests. So it's actually quite cool up there. Yeah. So females have generally one offspring. And from my studies, it's a very long mother-young bond. So they stay with their moms at least 18 months. So that's a year and a half. A big investment to the offspring.
Wow.
Yeah. And like other marsupials, do they have another young sort of ready to go as soon as one leaves the pouch, sort of kept in storage, as it were?
No, that's a real difference. And one of the things I studied in my dissertation was the comparison between tree kangaroos and terrestrial kangaroos. And there are quite a lot of differences, and that's one of them. So they don't. They come into estrus when the young are about 18 months old or so, and then they breed again. Yeah. So there isn't the embryonic diapause that you find in other kangaroos.
So they can't reproduce quite as quickly, obviously, as marsupials can really go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually that makes them more vulnerable in the wild, for sure.
Yeah, fascinating. So I know there are 2 species in Australia, and I know there are a bunch in New Guinea, but I don't know much more than that, to be honest. Could you tell us a little bit more about how many there are and how endangered the different species are?
Yeah, so now currently there are 14 species that are recognized. When I started studying tree kangaroos, there were 10 species recognized. So we still are trying to really understand the classification, the taxonomy of tree kangaroos. There is relatively little done on genetics, and it's one of the areas of research that's really needed. So if there's anyone out there interested in tree kangaroo genetics, definitely contact us. So 14 species, and like you say, there are 2 species in Australia, and the rest are on the island of New Guinea. And the tree kangaroo species range from near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, and then critically endangered. So there's a range with their conservation status.
And which ones are critically endangered? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, the one that's the most endangered that we know of that's been studied is the tenkile, which is, there's one other conservation program in Papua New Guinea, the Tenkile Conservation Alliance, and they focus on that species. It's been very hunted out. So they're working with communities in that area. Yeah.
Right. And, the thing about tree kangaroos is obviously they're arboreal. They live in high montane, dense forest. So they must be extraordinarily difficult to actually study. So what was it like when you actually went out there and started, looking for them and seeing your first ever tree kangaroo?
Yeah, well, it was absolutely amazing. It was, this is back in 1996 when I saw my first wild tree kangaroo in Papua New Guinea. And we had to, one thing that's really special about Papua New Guinea is that almost all of the forest is owned by the local landowners. So over 90% of the land. So to go into the forest or to do any kind of work, you need the permission of the landowners. So we flew into villages and we got to know some of the people there, and then befriended the best tree kangaroo hunter and went into the forest with him and his family. And we were up at 11,000 feet in the forest, so quite high up. And they used hunting dogs. They have special hunting dogs that are specialized for tree kangaroos. And when we saw that first animal, we didn't actually get a big, long look at it. But the fact that I could actually see one in the forest, I was blown away. Actually, tears, came to my eyes because I had been thinking about them and studying them for so long, several years before that. And then we went into this hunting area, and he and his family set aside that land so that we could do conservation research there. And it became this very wonderful relationship with that family and that village, and then that whole area. But the one thing that I always remember is when we got a good look at the first tree kangaroo, the fur is this deep reddish cinnamon color. And when you look up in the trees, the moss in the trees is that exact same color. And so it all, sort of came to me. It was like, oh, that's why they're that color, because they're camouflaged in forests.
Right. And how often do you see tree kangaroos without using dogs? If you were to go out and look for tree kangaroos in the forest without using dogs or radio telemetry, which you have now, how often would you see them?
Is that a trick question?
No. Because many of the people listening to this podcast dream about going out to wild places and looking for rare animals like tree kangaroos, etc. So I'm trying to establish the odds over here.
I would say 1%. No. I think what's great is, again, all of the work that we do depends on our local research team. And these are the landowners and the hunters or former hunters of tree kangaroos. And they are the ones that can spot the tree kangaroos. I have to say that I have never in 25 years been the first to spot a tree kangaroo in the wild. They often look for their tails hanging down. We all look for claw marks or dung on the ground or evidence of them eating food, but it is absolutely, they are the most elusive animal. Like you said, Charles, it's kind of ridiculous how hard it is to find them. But the great thing is we've been working in this one field camp for over 10 years. And now that we have a conservation area and there's no hunting in this area, people still hunt tree kangaroos, but not in the conservation area. There are many more animals. So the population has increased. And so the last time we went out to radio collar, we were able to capture 6 animals within a period of 2 weeks. And that was huge for us. So.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, so your conservation efforts are definitely having an impact on the ground, and you can really see that just by the number of tree kangaroos that you can actually trap.
Yeah, I didn't even believe it at first. The local guys were saying, when we go back up, it's going to be really easy to capture animals for radio collaring. And I said, "Are you sure?" And they were like, "Trust us, Lisa." And in fact, there were many more. So it was really exciting to see that.
Huh. So you haven't answered my question, Lisa.
Oh.
if you went out without dogs.
Yeah.
How often might you see a tree kangaroo?
So actually, we stopped allowing dogs to be used for finding tree kangaroos with the local guys because we were too afraid of the dogs. Because what happens is tree kangaroos, their first line of defense is to go up as high up as they can in the trees. And their last line of defense is to leap down and then hop away. And we were too afraid that dogs would end up killing them or hurting them. And so the guys, when we are doing the capturing for radio coloring, they don't use dogs. And they're so good at finding them and treating them. So we don't use dogs. So they can find them. So Charles, if you want to go out and see tree kangaroos, go with our local team and they will find you a tree kangaroo.
Now we're getting somewhere.
And that would be the best way.
Right. And is your area, do you take tourists? Do tourists ever get out there? I know very little about, I know it's fairly remote, but how does it work over there?
Yeah, it's there isn't great infrastructure for ecotourism. And we do take people, mainly we've taken donors out there, we've taken our research team, we've taken educators and so on, health workers. And so it's kind of on a case-by-case study or case-by-case basis for going out there. You certainly can, travel out there, and the intrepid traveler could make arrangements. And there's a Lonely Planets guide for Papua New Guinea. We're actually in there, so you can do it, but it's not easy. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, no, it's that's what I would have expected. And just to take you back to what you were saying earlier about the tree kangaroo numbers having increased, and it's easier to see them now. Is that the same for the other wildlife species in the area too? Is that protected area? Do they not do any hunting in that area, or is it just not the tree kangaroos?
Correct. No hunting can occur in the core conservation area. And what's really important to know is when the conservation area was established, the idea was that each clan set aside just a portion of their hunting land. So they still can hunt. They can hunt tree kangaroos and any other species that they hunt, like long-beaked echidnas or the cuscus of possums, but not in that core area. So, and the idea was, and what they call it is a wildlife bank. And so the animals can reproduce, and then the young can disperse into their hunting grounds. Yeah.
Right. Oh, I see. Okay. And what sort of area are we talking about that has been completely protected?
So it's about 78,000 hectares or 150,000 approximately acres of rainforest. That's no hunting zone. And then double that is their whole landscape. So actually, just last year, we re-gazetted with the government and the landowners to make it a landscape level conservation area, which includes their village areas, their agriculture areas, their hunting areas. But the core area is about 78,000 hectares.
Wow, that's really large.
So you mentioned, Lisa, long-beaked echidnas, which are, along with tree kangaroos, another one of the sort of really fascinating mammals of New Guinea for people like us. Have you seen those? And what other, you must have run into some really cool stuff there over the years. What else have you seen?
Yeah, so I have to say long-beaked echidnas are my second favorite animal besides tree kangaroos. They are the most amazing, being a monotreme, an egg-laying mammal. And there's only the platypus and the echidnas that are monotremes. And the long-beaked echidnas in New Guinea and up where we are very furry. So they have the needles, but you don't see them that much because there's so much fur. And I think it's because they're living high up in the cloud forest. They're gorgeous, really gorgeous animals. But we see a ton of different species of mammals. And actually, I'm going to add up my list after looking, on your website and listening to some of the other podcasts. Now I'm going to be a mammal watcher. Keeping a list.
Oh dear, we've corrupted her. Oh no, I'm sorry.
I know. I can't believe it, Charles. You did it.
Welcome to the dark side.
Yeah, really. But, and John, I looked at your list of marsupials that you've seen, and you definitely have to come to New Guinea and visit our site. There's the long-fingered tree hawk. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
So we have that. We have the two wallaby species, or the patamelon, the New Guinea patamelon, and the small Dorcopsis, which is the forest wallaby. Yeah. So we have those in our conservation area. We also have the mountain cuscus, which is a beautiful cuscus, very important to the people there. Painted ringtail possum, that's another one. Yeah. We have a lot of bat species, as you know. The fruit bats are really, really amazing. And then one that we did capture with one of the hunting dogs was it's called the Eastern white-eared giant rat, and it is giant. And growing up in New York City, I'm, like rats are this love-hate relationship. But I was very impressed with them. Yeah, so really incredible. And New Guinea quolls. So a whole host of other wildlife species and mammal species, and of course bird species, but we're not talking about birds. But the wildlife that's being protected in this conservation area, there's so much there. And species, we've done biodiversity surveys. So we've surveyed the rodent species, and who knows, there must be new species, new to science that we haven't even found yet.
Wow, it sounds amazing. I'm just going to wipe the drool off my chin before it short circuits my computer. I was actually talking with friends about trying to get over there. Originally it was going to be this year, and then maybe next year, or probably the year after now because of COVID. But it's ever since I read Tim Flannery's book about tree kangaroos, it's been an absolute dream of mine to get there. And it's really good to hear that you're protecting so much, that things are quite visible, because it was always the impression I had for many years, you could go there, but you just didn't see anything. Yeah. So that seems to be not true. Have you, just one sort of side question, have you ever tried using thermal images, thermal scopes to look for tree kangaroos? I think it would work.
Yeah, and we've talked about that actually multiple times, and it's something that I want to do, because I think it would be possible to do that, because the animals spend a lot of time in the high canopy, and they have favorite trees. So I think it would be, and they're the largest mammal. Yeah. So I think you could really identify them. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it is something that we're hoping to do at some point.
Okay, well, I'll bring mine with me when I visit. How about that?
It sounds great. No, we would love to have you. It would be absolutely wonderful to have a trip for mammal watching.
Right. You're really committing to something now that we're going to hold you to. Thank you.
And this is being recorded, is that right?
I'm going weak at the knees and thinking, which of my daughters would fetch the highest price so I can go on this.
I'm struggling to stay connected rather than going to pack and start researching flights. But let's keep going with this anyway. Thank you. So your project, it seems to have been stunningly successful in, as you're saying, working with communities to protect this huge area of rainforest, the first protected area in Papua New Guinea. Do you think this approach is replicable in other parts of the country? And have you got any plans to expand?
I think, and I've heard some of your other podcasts, I think the most important thing is that we didn't go in to tell people what to do. We went in with the information that tree kangaroos are endangered, and that we asked the questions: do you want your children to be able to hunt tree kangaroos? Do you want your children's children to be able to hunt tree kangaroos? And they all said, of course. And then we talked about how many tree kangaroos they used to find, and now how they have to go for many more days, and they, find fewer and fewer animals. So it really, from day one, it was from the ground up. And because the villagers own their land, they're the decision makers for the forests and for the wildlife. It really became about how to create a sustainable resource for themselves. And so they really invested in this idea, and this idea of a wildlife bank. They actually told us that was not a new concept for them, because in the old times, before they were missionized, they used to have taboo areas of the forest for cultural purposes. And so it very much, it served the same purpose, of areas that were set aside. And so we really instilled that they're doing this for themselves. They're not doing it for us, or that we're, telling them to do this. And so then, we have to also look at what their needs are for the community. So education, there were a lot of needs, healthcare, a lot of needs, and livelihoods and cash economy for them. And that's what's been this whole tree kangaroo conservation program, is looking at the needs of people and wildlife and the environment. And so one thing that's really great is we are now going into the third of a 5-year USAID biodiversity project. It's through the Cardno Corporation, and we have different partners involved. One is WCS Papua New Guinea, one is Nature Conservancy Papua New Guinea, and CARE International. And the tree kangaroo conservation program is considered the learning landscape. So we very much are sharing what we've been doing in the use area with the partners, so that they can establish other protected areas using some of the same methodologies. And of course, one thing with Papua New Guinea is, there are over 800 languages, 800 cultures there. And so you can't have one size fits all. And so, of course, things will be adapted for the areas where the other groups are working, but we can share our best practices, developing a ranger program using smart spatially monitoring and reporting tools. We have a junior ranger program, which is about, educating young people to become stewards of their forests. We have a One Health program, things like that. And so we very much are sharing those kinds of approaches. And we're really excited because it's starting to take hold in other parts of Papua New Guinea.
That's really fantastic. And there are parallels with things like the episode with Peter Zala and George Schaller, with exactly this kind of philosophy and approach. And so it's really inspiring to hear this working again in some ways difficult as Papua New Guinea, because there probably isn't anywhere more difficult, let's be honest.
It's
complicated, not difficult. Yeah.
Complicated, complex. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I love working there, because it is so complex. I'll never know, it's now 25 years, and I will never know the level, of complexity of culture and understanding and knowledge in New Guinea. And so I'm always learning from our counterparts from the communities. And one thing that's been really great, the Tree Kangaroo Conservation Program is now a partnership between the Woodland Park Zoo's Tree Kangaroo Conservation Program that myself and Trevor Holbrook, our manager, runs from this end. And then we have an NGO that we established in 2013 that is the Tree Kangaroo Conservation Program Papua New Guinea. And I'm very proud to say that NGO is now run completely locally. So we have our associate director, Modi Pontio, and we work hand in hand with her, but she's the leader of that NGO. And, because of the pandemic, it's now going to be 2 years since I'll have gone to New Guinea. Normally I go twice a year. But the work keeps going on because we have the great leadership in Papua New Guinea.
That's just fabulous. Yeah, really, congratulations. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so do you think that some of these other areas where these ideas are now going to be rolled out, do you foresee them being able to do some similar sort of things and using either tree kangaroo or perhaps one of the long-beak echidna or some of the Cusco species as their focus? Do you see that happening?
Yeah, absolutely, Charles. The WCS Papua New Guinea group, one of the communities that they're working with, they have the Goodfellows tree kangaroo, and that's another threatened species. And we are hoping also to do comparative research because that's also really lacking. We've only studied the Matschie's tree kangaroo. So that probably will become a flagship species for that protected area. And very much, there are so many species. I mean, there are other than mammals. I know you guys talk about mammals, but there are birds of paradise and the bird-winged butterflies. But yeah, definitely, there's such incredible wildlife in Papua New Guinea that it's very easy to choose a flagship species for protected areas there.
Wow, that sounds amazing. You've obviously been to Papua New Guinea many times and traveled a lot around the island. What is if there was one key mammal species that you could try and go and find, what would it be?
Well, I've been thinking about that question because I have not seen all 14 tree kangaroo species. I've seen the 2 in Australia, and I've seen the Matschie's tree kangaroo, and I've seen in captivity in Papua New Guinea some of the other species. But my dream is to see the spadix, which is the lowland tree kangaroo. That's an unusual tree kangaroo species. And some of the other tree kangaroo species, the Dorias, the Grizzleds, all of those in the wild. I actually, Tim Lehman, I don't know if you know him, National Geographic photographer, and he documented with Ed Scholes all 39 species of birds of paradise. And I have been bugging him to document all 14 species of tree kangaroos, and I would love to accompany him for some of those species. So that's my dream. Yeah.
That sounds like a very honorable quest. And should you need anyone to carry your bags, just reach out to John and I.
Absolutely.
It would be very fun, Charles, to take you to New Guinea, especially since you showed me the elephants in Tarangire. So I feel like that's very fair. That's what you do.
Absolutely. Yes, it was very difficult to find the elephants. We had to wait probably to at least until it's like 8 o'clock morning breakfast when they came walking past the camp. So I expect the same level of service when I visit you.
One species that I would love to see, again, because of Tim Flannery's book, is dingiso. Is that one that is possible to find in the wild, or is it so remote that you can't even get there?
Sorry, John, can you explain what a dingiso is?
Oh, sorry. A dingiso is a tree kangaroo, but it's black and white. It's like a sort of pounder cross with a tree kangaroo, I suppose you might say.
Exactly. Yeah, that is on the Indonesian side of New Guinea. And it is rare and endangered. And it would, I think, take a lot to find it, but I think it's possible. I think you should start working on a trip there, and I'll go with you.
Okay, done. Seems like a great plan.
But they're beautiful. Dingiso it's a beautiful mammal. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we have one more question of things that have gone wrong. I imagine maybe something went wrong once or twice.
It was hard to think about,
Also smooth.
Yes. So we were up at our field camp. It's called Dendawang Field Camp, and it's owned by one clan, but that clan's ancestors had given another clan the right to hunt in that land. So that's why things are so complex in New Guinea. So there was some disagreement between these two clans, but we were up at the field camp, and the goal was I had brought, a field veterinarian and, a whole research team. It's quite expensive to, put that all together. And we're up there, and one of the guys from the clan that had the permission to hunt was not happy. So he put a spell and so that we would not find tree kangaroos. And I remember sitting on it was actually this grassy, it was where the helipad was, an emergency helipad area, with the other landowner from the other clan, and basically going, what are we going to do? If we can't find, and we weren't finding tree kangaroos. It definitely was working. And, we were kind of crying because it was like, this is, how am I going to tell my funders and, all of that. And finally, we were able to talk with him and he agreed to take the spell off. And then we were able to find tree kangaroos. But it's amazing. And Papua New Guinea is filled with spiritual, cultural, as a scientist, you don't consider that in your grant proposals or in your, plans. But it made me realize how much you are part of another culture when you're doing work in another culture.
Yeah.
It strikes me that maybe, John, you could purchase this spell and use it on some of your competitors to stop them catching up with you.
Will it work if the
I don't know why they're not finding animals.
I love this idea. Okay.
Is there anything else that you'd like to communicate to the audience? Anything else that you'd like to say?
I guess, the mammal life in Papua New Guinea is unbelievable, and it's so little known and so little studied, and because it's so difficult to get out there, but it is a phenomenal place. And I believe that in the future, as local groups or local landowners are taking charge and creating protected areas, my guess is that there will be opportunities for people to go and visit and see the wildlife. And it's not easy and it's expensive and all of that, but I think that will help preserve and tell the story of Papua New Guinea wildlife. Yeah.
So, Lisa, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fascinating. I think we're going to head off and sell all of our possessions and start heading out to Papua New Guinea. But it was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for telling the story of tree kangaroos. Yeah, it was very enjoyable.
It was just an absolute pleasure and a privilege to listen and learn. Thank you so much, Lisa. And we will come and see you soon and some mammals, I promise.
Great.
You're listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.